So just as a reminder, everything that we're doing today is recorded. And today we're going to go again over what happened with the announcements prior to the holiday break, what they mean, and what you can do about it. All right, Zia. So let's get started here. By the way, this is recorded. We will be sending you the link to the recordings afterwards. And we will also be sending everyone who's registered for the slides as well. And also, we will be putting you guys onto our newsletter with the news blast. Many of you probably are already on there. That's how you knew about this. And this is important because there are so many changes going on. Okay. All right.
Perfect. So let's start talking about what that big announcement was. So basically, on December 23rd, IRCC announced that they were going to stop flagpoling as of December 24th. So as of Christmas Eve, no more flagpoling. And what is flagpoling? Well, flagpoling is defined as anyone who is traveling to the United States or St. Pierre and Miquelon just for the purpose of basically returning to Canada to access immigration services at the port of entry. So someone who, for example, who is in Canada on a, let's say they're here on a work permit, you're going to the US to get basically just turn around and come back and apply for a new work permit. That's what flagpoling really is. And so as of December 24th, IRCC has said, okay, we're not going to allow flagpoling anymore. And this also includes anyone who already had their approvals online, but needed to go to the border to pick up the physical permit itself. So, for example, someone who's inside of Canada as a visitor applied for a work permit from outside of Canada is basically gets the approval letter, has to go to the border to pick up their actual work permit. And what they were able to do in the past is just basically go to the US border, come back to Canada and pick up those permits. So all of that right now is no longer an option for flagpoling. And surprisingly, this is not just the land borders, this is also airports. And we're seeing now that anyone who is traveling to the US and coming back, they are, getting the questions of, did you just go to the States for the purposes of coming back to be able to apply for a work permit? And so certainly, you're seeing that both at land borders and at airports that there is no longer the option for flagpoling. There are very limited exceptions to this new rule. So the exceptions include American citizens, American permanent residents, anyone who is applying for their work permits through FTA, the free trade agreements, if you're under the professional or technician categories for the US, Mexico, Chile, Panama, Peru, Colombia, or South Korea free trade agreements, you are exempt from this basic stop to flagpoling. Also, spouses of professionals or technicians from the free trade agreements with Panama, Colombia, and South Korea are also exempt. Individuals who have existing appointments with CBSA are exempt. And lastly, truck drivers who have a work permit and are basically crossing the border for the purposes of their employment, for the purposes of working, they're also exempt from this end of flagpoling that has now come about.
Okay, so what do we do? What do you guys do? Where do you apply for your work permits and study permits? Or if you've already applied, where do you go? So one of the things you can do is apply inside of Canada. Now, inside of Canada has its challenges because one, it takes quite a long time, 4 to 5 months at least to usually get a decision for your work permits. And one of the things I must caution you is even if you apply inside Canada, if your status ends, do not leave Canada. You have to stay in Canada until a decision is made until you actually get that work permit. If you leave Canada while you are on implied status, you may not be able to come back. And even if you're able to come back because you have a visitor visa or you have visitor status, you can come in without a visa, you will not be able to continue to work until a decision is made. Okay, so inside Canada, if you apply before your current work permit expires, you can work until a decision is made. But if you leave Canada after your original work permit expires and before you get your new work permit, that's gone. Also, inside Canada, there is a way where you can ask the government for expedited processing. If you are changing jobs, you're going from one employer specific work permit to another employer specific work permit, you can ask for expedited processing as well inside Canada. Okay. The other thing you may want to do is apply at a visa post. Sometimes the visa post processing times, depending on your nationality, you can choose to apply to the visa post responsible for your nationality, or for the visa post responsible for Canada, which would be New York for the work permits. Sometimes those processing times are a little bit faster than being inside Canada. But please be aware that if you apply to a visa post, you do not have implied status. You do not get to maintain your status just because you applied at the visa post. You can only get implied status inside Canada, not at a visa post. The other difficulty about the visa post is when they issue you the work permit, if you have if you're from so basically when you apply, you'll get a approval letter, but you won't actually get the actual work permit like you do inside Canada. So if you apply to a visa post, you're going to have to activate that work permit. And like Zia said, if you now go to the border, they're likely going to say, no, we don't process that anymore. So you'll have to fly to another country other than the US, come back and see if they will activate your work permit. Now, sometimes you have other reasons to travel to the United States. Let's say you're going there to visit your family. Let's say you are going to go for a business reason. If you stay there for long enough and you can show that that was the genuine reason, you have evidence to show that that was the genuine reason, you may be able to convince the officer that that was the reason you went to the US, and therefore, please process my application now. Okay, it's not counted as flagpoling. Before, I think they kind of had a rule that if you left Canada for a number of days, 3 days or a week, depending sometimes on the visa, on the port of entry, that, okay, that's likely not going to be a flagpoling. But these days, I think the officers are much more cognizant of the fact that people might be using that excuse to actually flagpole. So you might have a lot of questions about why, and you have to provide evidence that that's indeed why you traveled to the US, not for flagpoling, but because you had other reasons. Traveling to another country. So for those of you who are from visa exempt countries, you don't need a visa to enter Canada. You could go to another country other than the US, come back and make your application then. That is still not counted as flagpoling. Flagpoling is only going to the US, St. Pierre or Miquelon. For those people who are from visa requiring countries, unfortunately, you will not be able to do that because the regulations stipulate that you cannot apply for a work permit at the port of entry if you require a visa. Okay.
Okay. And the second big announcement that happened right before the holidays was that IRCC basically said that they're going to be putting a pause on arranged employment points in express entry. What is arranged employment? Let's take a step back and talk about what this means. So arranged employment is you can get points in express entry if you have a job offer in Canada and that job offer is for at least 1 year after you have received permanent residence. And so what that means is essentially you're holding a job offer that's at least 18 months to 2 years or a permanent job offer. And in order to fall under the definition of arranged employment, either you needed to have a valid labor market impact assessment, or you were working on an LMIA based work permit, or you were on a closed, so an employer specific LMIA exempt work permit. So that's been issued through certain categories, like, for example, an intracompany transferee or certain free trade agreements, and that you've already worked for that employer for at least a year. So either you have a labor market impact assessment, or you have an LMIA based work permit, or you're on this closed work permit that's LMIA exempt, and you've already completed a year of employment with your employer. It's only these three types of situations where you would qualify for arranged employment points. So if you're on an open work permit, this wouldn't affect you at all. But if you meet either of these three definitions, you're able to qualify right now for these arranged employment points. And what that means is in your express entry profile in the express entry system, you're getting either 200 points for the executive management level position, so the highest level knock codes, or you're getting 50 points for any other knock codes. And so you're basically seeing this in your express entry profile, it's adding these points. And so what IRCC announced is that as of spring 2025, so as of spring of this year, they're going to temporarily remove these additional job offer points. And so anyone who is in the pool, what you'll see is that these points will no longer be there. Now, once this change takes effect, so in spring 2025, what we're going to see is that anyone who is currently in the pool or is entering the pool, they won't be eligible to get these 50 or 200 points. This change, though, will not affect any candidates who have already been invited to apply. So for those of you who have already received your ITA and are submitting your application, or you've already applied for permanent residence and you're waiting for a decision, this change will not affect in those situations. But otherwise, if you're in the pool, what we're going to see is that you'll no longer be receiving points, those 50 or 200 points. Now, is this actually going to happen, right? Of course, IRCC has announced that this change is expected to come into place in spring of 2025. But we see right now that we're going to likely have a change in our government. And so with that, this may not actually be implemented. We might not see this actually come into place in spring. And so certainly I think if you are in the situation where you're getting points for arranged employment, or if you're working towards getting points for arranged employment, it is important to be getting yourself in the pool, making sure you're capitalizing on the opportunity right now, because it could happen in spring, or this might just be a worry for no reason. We'll have to wait till spring to see exactly what comes of it.
So Zia, didn't they start pausing it for the IEC work permits recently?
That's a good point. So yeah, so what happened with IEC work permits is that they have actually moved the regulation which grants the IEC work permits has changed. And with that change, the effect is that IEC work permits are now no longer eligible for arranged employment points. It doesn't actually now fit under the category of employer specific LMIA exempt work permits that are eligible for arranged employment. So totally different, but yeah, right now, effective immediately, any IEC work permits are now no longer getting the 50 points or 200 points.
So that IEC, you don't get that anymore, but this pause for overall general for arranged employment not in place yet. So we'll see. Now, what happens, what should you guys do at this point if you don't have your permanent residence yet? Here are some general pieces of advice, but certainly we'd want to meet you and give you some specific advice for your situation. But in general, apply while you can. So if you're lucky enough to be in the pool, you get invited to apply. You're grandfathered, as Zia said, under the current rules, even if the arranged employment points pause comes in place later on. Okay, so if you haven't yet and you might be able to qualify, first of all, seek advice to see whether or not you should. But if you can, my advice to you, with immigration changing all of the time, if you can do it before it changes. You can't do it anymore in the future. You should also strategize on other permanent residence options. There are quite a lot of permanent residence options that are not just express entry. So do come and we can take a look at your situation. Even though the government certainly is trying to limit the number of workers, international workers who can get permanent residence, there are still spots open right now. When the government likely changes in the spring, what will happen then? Probably my estimate is that most of these applications that are provincially based likely will stay. Express entry may change, but it might not change right away. The new government will need some time to understand what they're getting themselves into. So it might remain stable, I would say, until probably the latter part of this year before they may make some changes. But express entry was brought in by the conservatives, this whole point system. So they're probably not going to be canceling express entry, but there are other programs as well that are out there that are, like the Rural Community Immigration Program, a lot of regionalization that I can see all parties supporting because it really takes the power away from the federal government of selection, which, I think most of them actually kind of like, and gives it away to the local governments, which is great for points with voters as well. Okay, so that being said, there are some things that we might be able to predict, and there are certain things that we know, having been working in the system for decades, as to what likely will happen. Immigration is so tightly tied to politics these days, but there are certain things that the politicians have said that likely will happen, and you do need to prioritize and make sure that you put yourself in the right position to capitalize on that. While you're waiting for your permanent residence, don't forget about your temporary residence. Just because you've applied for permanent residence doesn't mean that you're home free with regard to your temporary residence. So even though arranged employment points may be paused, it might still be important for your employer to try to get you an employer-specific work permit, maybe the LMIA, maybe other employer-specific work permits, because if your post-grad work permit, for example, expires, you need a way to be able to extend your work permit while waiting for your permanent residence. So come and talk to us about that. And, hopefully you would have retained a good lawyer from the very beginning to start planning. But if you haven't and you got an invitation to apply, I mean, I'm just saying, what is the most important thing in your life right now? Being able to stay in this country? If so, you have to make sure that you do whatever you can to stay. And one of the most important things is to make sure that you're working with a lawyer, an expert who understands the system and can make sure that you're not making any mistakes. You can do all the research you want online, but I will tell you that you won't know everything that you need to know online, okay, by doing your Google searches. Make sure that you submit the right, perfect application. If you forget to, cross the T, dot an I, and, I'm not even exaggerating when I say that. If you forget to submit a certain document the way that it's supposed to be submitted, or you didn't do something and your application is rejected, in this kind of system, you just might not get a second chance to do so. All right, so we have some questions, and we're going to spend the majority of our time today answering questions for you guys. So if you have questions, we're going to do first come, first serve. So put them in the Q&A box, okay? And we'll answer as many as we can today. All
All
right.
right.
Okay.
So, Elizabeth, the first question here, and this was when we were talking about flag polling. So, what about working holiday visa holders? Like, if you're going for a second working holiday or you're applying through the ROs, are you able to get your work permit still?
Mm-hmm. So that's the issue, right? When you apply for your IEC work permits, they're not applied inside Canada. They're assessed by a visa post. And so you can still apply. You can be inside Canada and apply, but when you get your work permit, it's going to have a approval letter, not the actual work permit. And, when the legislation, when this policy change came out, I had called the shift supervisor at the Peace Bridge and asked, so in these kind of cases, will you issue the work permits? And they said, according to the directive, they will not be issuing the work permits there. So if this is the situation, you might need to fly to another country other than the US. Then when you come back, you could have it issued at the airport. Uh, Zia, could you explain what IEC work permits are?
Yeah, definitely. So, IEC is International Experience Canada. These are specific types of work permits. So, there's either working holiday, young professionals. Basically, these are for individuals with uh, basically IEC has certain countries that can participate, and through these, you can either go through the working holiday or young professionals. It's for young individuals who are citizens of any of these IEC countries, and basically, it's great work permits that you can apply for. But like Elizabeth was just saying, it does get processed outside of Canada, and so when you're getting approved, you have to basically be picking it up from your entry to Canada.
There are many, many kinds of work permits out there, guys, beyond the postgrad work permit. Just come to us and we'll take a look at your options for extending your work permits. Zia, oh, is it my turn or your turn to ask?
Here, okay. First time work permit applicants, can they still create express entry profiles and enter arranged employment information even before they're coming to Canada?
Yeah. So when you put yourself into the pool, you state what is true at the time that you enter yourself into the pool. And if your situation changes, that you have to change your profile in the pool. So you certainly would, if you have arranged employment, then right now, arranged employment is still there. So we enter your situation according to what the situation is, and you will still get your arranged employment points. Now, if you're not invited to apply, remember, when you put yourself into the pool, have you applied for permanent residence? No, you have not applied for permanent residence. Okay. Very, very important distinction between just entering into the pool and not having received that invitation to apply compared to when you've received the invitation to apply and then you apply. Okay, so if you have received an invitation to apply, and then your points are locked in at that point. If you're in the pool, you have not received the invitation to apply, your points are not locked in at that point. So if you're in the pool, you get your arranged employment points, the government pauses the arranged employment points, you'll likely see a massive drop in your points because your arranged employment points will be gone. Zia, um, they, can you explain again about this arranged employment? So, they thought that the announcement was just with regard to LMIAs, not necessarily LMIA exempt job offers. Could you explain a little bit more about that announcement?
Yeah, for sure. So when we're talking about the express entry system and we look at the way that the instructions talk about points and specifically arranged employment points, there's three ways to qualify for points based on arranged employment. The first is that you have a valid LMIA. So you have the LMIA decision, and it's not expired just yet. Or the other way is that you have a work permit that's valid and is based on an LMIA. Or the third way to qualify for arranged employment points is that you currently are on an LMIA exempt employer specific work permit. So your work permit lists your employer on it, but it was not issued based on an LMIA. So this is when we're talking about free trade agreements, for example, or intercompany transfers. These are all examples of LMIA exempt closed, so employer specific work permits. And then the second part to that is if you're on that LMIA exempt employer specific work permit, you have to have already worked for that employer for a year. And in terms of this announcement for the pause on arranged employment points, as of right now, the announcement is just basically saying that all arranged employment points, we're looking at it to be paused. That's all the direction that's been announced so far.
Yes, I mean, the government certainly made a big deal out of fake LMIA that were being sold, right?
Mhm.
And that's what the minister kept harping on about. So that was their target. But apparently, they're not very good at target practice because they missed just that and they used and basically shattered the entire LMI arranged employment based on their announcement, which is not the official regulate policy change. They don't actually need to change regulations anymore because of ministerial instructions. It's kind of like a decree by the minister. They can just change whatever they want. And so the problem is that if it is that they change exactly what they declared, then all of these other LMI exempt work permits, that's all grouped in together with that. What's actually going to happen? We don't know. It could be that, they wake up and say, oh no, we're just going to do certain kinds of LMIAs or whatnot. But so far, the announcement has been all arranged employment points.
Elizabeth, can you still extend or get another visitor's visa through flagpoling?
Um, so the visitor visa is never applied at the port of entry. A visitor visa is something where if you are from a visa requiring country, you have to submit your passport and get it on your passport. Okay. Visitor records is what provides you with status. And there's no point in going to the border usually to get a visitor record because you just want to extend your status in Canada. You just apply for extending your status in Canada. It does include people who want to go there just to get their visitor status extended because that's, yes, any sort of temporary situation with immigration, you're doing that. But there's no need to do a visitor record normally that I can think of. What people often do is they leave the country and then they want to re-enter the country. And once they do, you get a default of time of 6 months when you re-enter the country. That's not necessarily applying. You're applying to enter the country, but you're not really. So they have to decide whether or not they want you to enter the country or not. But if they just let you in, then you have your default 6 months. Or you can ask them for a visitor record, and they can decide whether or not they want to give you a visitor record at that place. Mainly the flagpoling has to do with the work permits and study permit applications there and activating them at the border. Zia, this person has asked, what do you think the government what's the past experience about effecting laws such as the LMI? Is the government usually punctual on effecting laws?
Oh man. It's always difficult to say, right? Because there's always, like, we heard about the end of flagpoling for a while, and there was never really a date, and then all of a sudden it just kind of happened, and it was happening. It was announced on December 23rd and effective from December 24th. So really, I think it's a mixed bag in terms of when things are talked about and when they're going to happen. But I think the big thing here is that we're going to likely see a change in government. And so with that, they'll likely revisit all these um, different changes, like whether or not we're going to see arranged employment points end. I think that remains to be seen. It's one thing that it's been announced to say that we want to do this as of spring, but I think that really does depend on what happens with this upcoming election.
Yeah, so one of the things you need to understand is the arranged employment, pause of arranged employment isn't actually regulation change. So what it means is doesn't have to go through parliament. It doesn't require parliament to be up, right? Because parliament right now is prorogued. That means the members of parliament aren't meeting there. That doesn't they could it's just a ministerial it's called ministerial instructions. The minister can announce at any time. That being said, if they say spring, well, now it's not spring. Everybody can see it's snow outside. Probably not going to be in the next couple of months. Spring usually starts in March, and usually the government doesn't, unless they have some political reason to do it, maybe for the election, they want to gain some points with the Canadian public saying that, oh, we don't want people to take away your jobs or some, BS like that, then they might do for their election. But otherwise, we'll see because there are some programs, for example, the caregiver program that was supposed to have come out in the fall of 2024 that hasn't still yet been announced. So it will require some thought, but there is also going to be a lot of pushback, I think, from business if they don't allow arranged employment points. Um, so it's hard for us to say. It's hard for anyone to say. But hang in
And
there.
of course, I mean, even if it does happen, it was always like the announcement was that it's going to be a temporary pause. So even if it does happen, how long is temporary,
Mm,
right?
yeah.
Again, if you see it happen before the election, is it possible that, of course, it happens and then the temporary pause is lifted after the election when you see a
Hmm.
when you see a change in government? Who knows?
Hmm. I think right now, all you can do is apply if you can, apply as early as possible if you can, and look at Plan B and C as well, other ways to get permanent residence. That remember, this is only one option, which is express entry. There might be a lot of other options as well.
Yeah, I think it comes down to, again, like you said, Elizabeth, really making sure that you're applying as soon as possible and taking advantage of every opportunity available to you.
Mhm. On that note, Zia, we have someone who said that their employer applied for the LMIA for them. It was submitted in September 2024. Uh, it's not out yet. Do you think that's something to be worried about?
Um, they applied in September 2024. Processing times for
4 months.
LM
Yeah, it's depending on which kind. Probably, yeah.
exactly. It's
Because
hard to say. Oh, were you going to say something, Liz?
I was just going to say, depending on which one it is, the arranged employment points, they were taking around 7 or 8 months to process.
Hmm.
But some of the other applications take maybe 3, 4 months, and then you have Christmas break. So it really depends on that. But the processing time is not as worrying as whether or not they did it right the first time.
Exactly. Yeah, that's it, right? With any type of immigration application, and especially LMIAs where you have to do advertising, um, making sure that that application is perfect before it gets submitted, because officers are really looking for any reason to really refuse an application now.
A lot of it, I think 90% of them used to have to deal with the ads. Now we see a lot more having to deal with business legitimacy. So
Hmm.
because of the new rules. Mhm.
Elizabeth, if there's an LMIA pause, is there any chance of the score lowering in the express entry pool from the current spike that we're seeing?
The score, yes, I would say the score probably will lower. So if you don't have arranged employment points, then you might have it's a better playing field for you if you don't have arranged employment points. Um, how much it will lower? Say it's a fair bit because, if you don't have the 50 points, or the 200 points, I think certainly that, yeah, I would say you probably see a fair bit of lowering for a while. Okay. So there's a two-part question, Zia. Someone is uh flag polling.
Mhm.
Sorry, the story. So they said if someone is not, if flag polling is not valid, can someone apply online for a work permit? And secondly, if the person is waiting for a PMP decision, can they continue to work?
Okay, so the first question was if they can apply online for a work permit still.
Yeah.
Okay, so applying online for a work permit is obviously still a possibility. Now, of course, you still do have to be eligible for the work permit. Basically, what I would recommend is reach out to us. Our email address is right there on the screen right now. We'd be happy to speak with the individual about what your options are for a work permit, and what that process is going to look like. But yeah, certainly if you're here in Canada, can't flagpole anymore, then the option would be to apply online for a work permit. In terms of being able to work while you're waiting for a decision on a provincial nominee application, that of course does depend on your status here in Canada. Um, Applying for provincial nomination doesn't automatically give temporary status. We would want to make sure that you do have status here in Canada. You're able to continue with temporary residence while you're waiting for a decision on the nomination application. And certainly, if you're looking to work, see if you are eligible for a work permit, and how we can go about getting that for you. Um, Elizabeth, the next question here is what if they're applying for work and holiday permits from another country? Can they still get the permit when they arrive in Canada?
Right. So if you're applied for a working holiday work permit and you're outside of the country and you want to come into the country, then certainly you can do that. That's not called flag pulling. Flag pulling is when you're going from Canada to another country, to the US specifically, and then you want to come for basically people just, why is it called flag pulling? Because you go around the flag and then you come back and you apply for that. So in your case, if you have the approval letter and you're coming from another country to enter the country, you can certainly do that. When someone has their work permit extension in Canada, how do they get their entry visa extended?
Yeah, so you can actually apply for so this is called a TRV, the temporary resident visa. You can apply for a new TRV online once you have your new work permit. And then basically what happens is that once it's approved, you'll get a request for your passport, you mail your passport in, and IRCC will print the TRV into the passport and send it back to you. Elizabeth, did we say earlier that IEC young professional work permit holders are not eligible for 50 points?
Yes, so that just was in place, I think, a few days ago. The government just announced that. Now, Zia, was that for future IEC work permits or current as well?
Yeah, so it's interesting because again, this wasn't an announcement to say, hey, we're no longer allowing IEC work permits to be eligible for the arranged employment points. Instead, what happened was that they basically said it, this is just an update to our program. And IEC work permits, the regulation that grants the IEC work permit has now changed, from a certain paragraph to a different paragraph of the regulations. And basically, when we look at what that update means, well, we look at what the effect of that update is, and to do that, we go back to the definition of arranged employment in the ministerial instructions, for express entry. The new section in the regulations that IEC work permits now fall under, don't seem to be part of the current arranged employment definition. And so that basically means that we're now taking away those 50 points for anyone who is on an IEC work permit. And essentially, in my opinion, it just basically means that this is immediate.
Mhm. But I wonder, and this is again something that we are under discussion as well, with other lawyers, and we're seeking clarification with IRCC, is that previously the IEC work permits were issued under the section 205B, which does qualify for under arranged employment. So if you already have an IEC work permit, they would have been issued under the previous regulation. So if
Mhm.
that's the case, then if you're under that work permit, it should still qualify for arranged employment. The new work permits will be issued under new regulations. That's fine. So that's for people later on getting those young professional work permits. So the question is, if you currently have a work permit, it might still be that because it was issued under the old regulation, that you're still eligible for the 50 points. But we're seeking clarification on that point. All right.
Okay. The oh, I think
Okay, is it my turn? Your turn too? Oh, all right.
here, I'll go on the next one here. So
Okay.
Um, let's find a question here. So we said that US citizens are exempt from flag polling. So can initial work permits still be applied for at the port of entry for US citizens?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, your initial work permit, if you have not been in Canada and you're just in the States, your initial work permit application can still be applied at the port of entry, irrespective of your nationality. So let's say, you're German, you've been living in the States, you want to come to Canada, you want to apply for your work permit, you can do that at the border. All right. Someone is on a LMIA work permit, is working to submit their application on the Hong Kong Pathway Stream B. She wants to apply for, will she be able to, after her LMI expires, will she be able to apply for the bridging open work permit while waiting for the PR to be approved?
Uh, sorry, so she's applied for her permanent residence and her work permit is expiring.
Yeah, so she wants to apply for the bridging open work permit, which is, available for the Hong Kong program. So you can apply for the
Yeah,
bridging open permit. We can, yeah, and so far you can, but
exactly.
we'll need to see later on if they change that as well. Um, how long does it take to apply for a entry visa at the point of renewal of work permit and turnaround time? I think this person is saying if they have their work permit extended and they have it in hand, how long are the visas to allow them to travel outside of Canada and the US taking to process?
Do you know what the recent processing times are,
I
Liz?
think
I
it's
think,
around a month or two. It's not too long.
yeah, it wasn't too
Last time
bad.
yeah, yeah. Oh,
Um, Go ahead.
oh no, you go ahead.
So if I'm interested and I want some assistance, having gone through this webinar, I see that I'll need some help. How do I schedule a consultation appointment? What are the fees to schedule a consultation, and what are the fees for applications?
Okay, so fees for the consultation, if you've attended this webinar, please let us know that you've attended this webinar because we give you a discount. The discount is $50 off a regular fee consultation fee. So the discounted fee is $100 plus tax. And come and just email us probably would be the best thing. Our email is right here, inquiries@lmlawgroup.com. And yeah, just we'll schedule a time and one of the lawyers will meet with you and go over your options then. It's only after we know what your options are that we can actually quote you our fees for helping you apply for a work permit, apply for permanent residence. And after that consultation, we'll let you know what our fees are. You don't certainly there's no obligation to hire us if you don't want to. But no matter what, I would highly recommend that you come so that you at least understand a plan for yourself. Okay. Um, someone is saying, oh, I think we're pretty much done, right?
Yep, sorry, we were just getting another question about the consultation, so I was just responding
Oh,
to that.
oh, okay. All right. Okay. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for your amazing questions. Thank you so much for coming here. It certainly is difficult times these days, but hopefully we'll see a light at the end of the tunnel soon. And we're certainly here to try to add some light to your life as well. Hope all is well. Happy New Year, guys. Hang in tight. It's gonna be a bumpy ride, but we're here for you. Okay? Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, take care, bye.